This is on Dratnus' channel, right?
Oh, yes, it is.
Oh.
And hello, everybody.
Hello.
And welcome to episode 22 of the Titanforge podcast. My name is Dratnos, and joining me, as always, are my friends Tettles and Trell.
Hello, Dratnos.
Hello. And this week we have special guest, AutomaticJak, over here on this side, I guess.
How's it going?
Jack, you may recognize as the most handsome face on the MDI broadcast.
Wow.
What the fuck?
Throwing Tettles under the bus.
Oh,
Dude, he just
Tettles is here.
Salute too.
Well, yeah, he's not here, so it's mostly aimed at you. In fact, it was entirely aimed at you. I'm sorry, Tettles. But outside of the MDI, Jack, you're also a streamer and a healer on multiple different specs, right?
That's right. Priest and Mistweaver primarily.
Mm-hmm. I remember back in Legion as well. It was mostly the priest stuff, the holy priest even.
That's right. And then we had to play a little bit of Paladin at the end.
Right. Yeah. As did everybody.
Yep.
So this week we're going to talk to our special guest AutomaticJak about. We're going to talk a little bit about the MDI, which is coming up next weekend. That Tettles and Jack will both be casting at BlizzCon. So that's really looking forward to that. Then we'll talk a little bit about the state of healing in the live game as it is now and on PTR. And we'll talk about the corrupted affix and corrupted items, both from PTR as well. And you guys have been all a little bit on the PTR, right? All three have actually. I think everybody here has got some PTR experience, which is great because that means that we're not going to be entirely ignorant about what we're talking about.
What are you trying to say? That we just kind of wave our hands in the air a little bit? And
it's better than we usually do. It's better than we usually do.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty prepared. We know different. Well, we have all the perspectives from every role in the new dungeon affix.
Yeah,
that's true.
Jack, I think notably our first healer ever to be on the show.
It took 22 episodes.
It did. Yeah, we've had 7 brewmasters or something on.
We know a lot of brewmasters for some reason.
Mm-hmm. But up until now, the closest thing we had to a healer was Tettles playing Resto, which we will not talk about it.
What are you trying to say? I healed an MDI once.
That's true. That's true.
That is true, and they moved him to the caster bench as a result. They're like, what can we do to guarantee this will never happen again? So anybody who wants to find our show, we are on Twitter. If you want to send us questions there at TitanforgeWow. Even if you can't catch us when we're live, we always post up the topic in advance, so you can ask us questions there. We do also have a Patreon, patreon.com/Titanforge, where you can support the show if you choose to do so. Among those supporters are Paul, Gyu, Never Nude, Ahar of US Proudmore, King of Skills, and Zuku. Thanks for your support. We do also have a Discord if anybody wants to join that one. That one is a nice place to send us questions too. We also post the topics well in advance there, so that's a great place to be. We hang out there all the time too. So let's get started, I guess, by talking about the state of healing. The state of healing in the game right now, it's pretty polarized, right? There are some clear best things you can be doing in both Raid and Mythic Plus. In Raid, this patch in particular, we've had Holy Paladin and Disc Priest be extremely dominant, especially among the high-end tiers. Jack, how much do you think that's a product of the fight design this tier versus just the specs in general, and they would be OP in any tier with the design they're in right now?
I think it's a bit of both for Eternal Palace in particular. They really stepped up in terms of making fights a lot more tight in terms of their enrage timers, to the point that even if you had people decked out in the best benthic gear possible, you just couldn't meet enrage timers unless your healers were contributing. And add on to the fact that a lot of Eternal Palace has been heavy on burst damage. So if people are not completely topped off and we're not having damage reduction cooldowns constantly, for big mechanics. I mean, my weekend guild's working on Zakul right now, where we only have one disc, we only have one paladin. We don't have a disc, and it's just absolute nightmare compared to running double disc, double paladin, or something like that when we ran it with Future. So,
is that your Mistweaver guild?
Yeah, it's my Mistweaver's guild. So it's just kind of like a perfect storm in Eternal Palace, and it just led to massive dominance. You gave everything to those two classes.
Do you think that if it was based solely around throughput, that the classes would be better off? Do you think it's because like DPS and damage reduction matter, which is what Paladin and Disc bring so heavily? Like, do you think if it was just throughput reliant, it would be a little bit easier?
It's kind of a bit of both. So when you're looking at if it's just throughput, you have to look at what kind of encounters and what kind of throughput's required. So like we were doing testing this week for like the Hive Mind, and there's almost no burst damage. It's just that the boss will put up greater periodic damage onto the raid constantly. It's just a rot fight. Whereas, was aforementioned, Zakul is just big bursts of damage every 45 seconds to a minute, something like that. So you have to look at what kind of damage is going to be coming, and that'll be determining how much more valuable damage reduction is. Because Devo Aura is insane, but it's less insane, it's less punishing if you don't have it on a fight that's just raw ticking damage.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, Tranquility also is good there, but Tranquility doesn't do anything against Zakul's all explosions at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, once the explosion's gone off, you either live or you die, and then you have plenty of time to top everybody off.
Yeah, it's actually tough to imagine two, like, the second to last boss and the last boss being more favorable to Pally and Disc than Ajara and Zakul. Like, Ajara, just everybody's max health is reduced, so, like, absorb shields on the top of them from Disc is so big. And the, damage reduction aspect against a reduced health pool is great for them, too.
Well, for raw healing, wouldn't something like a Resto Druid actually be better at healing Ashara? It's just the damage reduction is so important.
Potentially. I mean, health pools are lowered. There's only bursts of damage here and there. So it doesn't really come into the question of whether or not it's important to be able to have these kind of cooldowns. Because even when you have a very small arcane orb and it detonates, it's still a ton of damage onto the raid because health pools are so small.
Yeah, and specs like Resto Druid would like for everybody to have a nice big health pool so that there's time for the HOTS to tick the whole way up, right?
Yep.
And Resto Shaman would like everybody to be able to survive a hit of damage so that they can get some benefit from their mastery. So it's a lot of unfortunate confluence for the specs that aren't Pally and Disc. Not to mention the fact that Pally and Disc have the passive damage. Like, it really is kind of insane, actually, just how much those two specs have in Raid right now. However, we are seeing some nerfs. Actually, both of these specs are getting some hits in the upcoming patch. Holy Paladin's Glimmer is being nerfed pretty dramatically for a raid environment, right? The 8 target cap will really hurt their ability in their cooldowns to have glimmers on everybody. And Disc is also getting a couple of small hits, although the Disc nerfs really look like very, very minor adjustments for a spec that might not be a minor adjustment away from balanced. What do you think about those changes, Jack?
So the Paladin changed Cap's Glimmer at 8, I believe, instead of just as many as you wanted. And that's around how many Glimmers you're going to be able to get out without cooldowns up. So this basically puts more of a nerf on like high-end players who were able to use their cooldowns together, using Holy Avenger, Avenging Wrath together for specific ramps, building up enough Glimmers for specific mechanics, and then just utterly dominating the healing as a result. So it's more of a high-end nerf onto that end. It can nerf their damage slightly as well, since they can't have an offensive Glimmer onto the enemy without imposing that cap. So it'll make it so their passive damage is a little bit lower. But in general, once you start spacing out your cooldowns, it's not like Holy Shock is a slouch ability anyway. It's still going to be incredibly strong. Devotion Aura is still incredibly strong. You're still bringing passive damage. So instead, you're looking at what are the encounters going to be bringing, or are they going to start having another round of nerfs for this class?
And as we talked about with some of the other kind of roles, the last couple fights in particular are really where it matters the most. Which healing spec is favored in those, because we can probably get through the other fights with anything.
Yeah, you would carry like some worse healers, worse DPS, even potentially worse tank specs throughout the first 8-9 bosses if they're like by far above and beyond for the last couple.
Yeah, I mean, we opted to go Prop Paladin Brewmaster instead of double Brewmaster for Orgazoa because we really liked having Aegis of Light on Ashara, for example. 20% damage reduction to be able to start using on a 3-minute cooldown for everybody else. It's just another cooldown, another utility for it. Prop Paladin wasn't bad for Orgazoa, but it's just another little bit of utility that we can use for it.
Yeah, you're like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel when you've got Aegis of Light as part of the like core strategy for you.
It's a good ability.
Hey, it's a really good ability.
I've done it too. I've done that on Zakul also. I've cast that ability. You do what you got to do.
I've cast that ability once.
I casted an M plus once. That's not a good place for that one. We don't do that again.
Not quite.
That was a mistake. Speaking of M plus, we have a completely different problem than Raid. An entirely different set of like spec balance problems, right? And the big one in M plus is just Resto Druid running wild for the 7th tier in a row.
It's kind of crazy.
Dude.
2 healers are so overpowered in Raid compared to the rest, and then a completely different healer is so overpowered in Mythic Plus. Like, it just shows how important and different the playstyles are in the 2 scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is there's just a bunch of abilities that like don't do anything in Raid, like Entangling Roots and Typhoon and stuff that are big for Resto Druid and Mythic Plus. And part of it is also just healing 5 people is so different from healing 20. And healing when there's like downtime between pulls is so different than constantly healing over 4 minutes, right? Jack, what's your perspective on the problem with Resto Druid, and do you have any like suggestions for what to do about it?
I think one of the biggest things is that when Disc and Paladin are pretty insane for raids, which they are, they're at least on the radar for buffs and nerfs and changes. Druid's been unchanged pretty much for 2 expansions now. There's been nothing going on that's really going to start affecting it at all. And we're still not doing anything about it. It's like insanely frustrating there.
Are you trying to say that those changes that they were trying to make mid-expansion then backtracked on was not the way to approach that?
That's unfortunately not the play there. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like the raid balance gets like a couple weeks of dev time, and then like right before the patch comes out or whatever, where they push it to PTR, they're like, oh, there's Mythic Plus. Do we need to balance anything? And then every time they get to Resto Druid, they're like, this should be hard to do and make it still okay in raid. We're just not gonna bother.
Yeah,
we'll get it next time. Yeah.
One of our devs plays Resto Druid and he would get offended, so let's just skip that one.
Could you imagine they just like they do keys with a bunch of different healers, and whichever dev they have on Resto Druid is like just very bad at the game, and they're just like, yeah, Resto Druid's fine, it's not that OP. I don't know what everybody's complaining about.
As weird as it sounds, I don't actually think Pally or Mistweaver are that bad for Mythic Plus currently. I do think that Restoration Druid is just too good for beguiling.
What's the other healer on the list there, Tettles? What's the other healer on the list?
Disc is fucking canceled, man. I'm sorry.
What? Unbelievable. Honestly, I think this has actually been pretty good this season. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
last season was the dole. Last season was bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think all 3 of those specs are playable. I just think that Resto Druid is too good at dealing with beguiling, so you have to have a Druid in your group. I would say that's actually most of the issue right now, because other than that, Mistweaver's damage with Way of the Crane, Holy Pally with all of the stuff that they bring, both of them are pretty good. Just Resto Druid brings similar damage, even if it isn't a different profile, but they can root beguiling mobs, they can spam knockback beguiling mobs. Every time I play with the Holy Pally, he walks up, he hodges it, and he's like, all right, Moonkin, you get to go knock this back while I'm going to go ook out in melee.
And then he out DPS you.
And he out DPS me, and I want to die.
Tettles actually gets so mad about this as well. It's really fun. Every time I've ever done keys with Tettles and a Holy Paladin, afterwards we're just in Discord, and like the Holy Paladin clicks their disconnect from Discord button, and Tettles just goes on a rant for like 5 minutes about how unbelievably mad he is, and how mad he is about
Man, I gotta help this guy keep this emissary out of the pack who's gonna beat me in damage anyway and make me look like crap.
Yes, well, at
Tettles
least Jack
manifesto.
will penance the fucking enchanted emissary.
Yeah. The pet is OP,
Very
all
nice,
right? It hits
very
it 3
nice.
times, knocks it back 3 times.
And heals your group. That's pretty good.
Your group.
Yeah, we'll have to do some Disc Priest Boomkin Brewmaster keys sometime. That'd be good.
I gotta work on my NA priests, man.
Let's bring his Mistweaver instead.
Yeah, my Mistweaver's ready. He's ready.
Is there anything?
Finally got conflict rank 3.
Is there anything that you're really excited about for healers on the PTR, like essence wise? Have you been playing that Steal Your Essence?
I played around with it a little bit. Being able to take the meme beam is pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, Crucible of Flame already deals really good damage. So if we're going into the new Corruption affix as well, you're stuck in there with 1 zone and you have a couple priority adds to kill. So you kind of might as well take Crucible of Flame anyway.
Right, yeah. I feel like that Steal Your essence is going to be... I don't know, maybe for really big AoE it'll be worth putting on the healer, or if you have some kind of
like MDI or sales runs or something like that.
Mhm.
I can see that for sure.
I think at the key level's low enough, I think it'll matter. I think for upper end, if you want to play for damage, I think you're absolutely right, though. You'd rather just take Crucible. It just seems like it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, because it's also a little bit lower overall as well. I mean, if somebody's taking Meme Beam, they're going to be doing it. They're not going to be imposing that extra 30% CD that we would get as a healer, stealing the essence from them. So that's another aspect.
Right, yeah, that 30% extra cost is a pretty big tax on the cooldown.
Some of the minors are pretty insane as well. Spirit of Preservation gives you like a stacking buff to one of your single target heals. And then once you consume those stacks after the next 6 seconds, whenever you cast the next quick heal, so it's Vivify, Shadow Mend, Regrowth, whatever, you get bonus crit towards the next cast. So almost every time you're getting like 100% crit onto the next cast, which is just insane for almost every healer, really.
It seems like that might really fill a hole in like
good.
Disc and Resto Shaman's kit as well, where they have this problem of there's a tank dying and they want to press a button to save them, and they press their button, and like while they're casting that, the tank is taking more damage than is going to be healed by the Shadow Mend or the Healing Surge.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues with Disc is having to balance your talents and to some extent your essences on how safe or how aggressive that you want to play. Like Resto Druid already has all the healing that it needs in its baseline kit for a 5-man, so they just try to maximize their damage. Whereas some dungeons like Shrine of the Storm don't really have much damage at all on people compared to something like maybe Motherlode or Waycrest, which is a lot more group-wide damage, a lot more pressure on everybody, or more pressure on the tank. So the extent with which you can play like hyper-aggressive as Disc versus having to change all your talents and then drop like 8 to 10k DPS or something like that, instead of doing 25, 27k overall, you're doing like 17, 18 or something. You know, it is very polarizing. So the more essences that we get that are always going to be defensive, like we don't have a full list of DPS essences that we can start picking through, I think the better that it starts making some of those other classes in terms of just their raw throughput.
What do you think of the Schism change for Disc specifically?
Oh, it had to happen. Like that was busted.
Yeah.
It had to happen.
I hated that. I hated that shit in PvP, but I didn't know how bad it was in PvE.
Yeah. Like every single time that you use Crucible of Flame or the Cyclotronic Blast, you could buff its damage by 40%. Just flat, outright, every single time. Like it was super busted. It had to happen.
Yeah, I was doing some battlegrounds, farming up blood of the enemy on an alt or whatever, and just like a disc priest would cast Schism on me, and they'd start channeling Cyclotronic Blast, and I'd look at my kit cooldown, and it was down. I'm like, it's been nice. I'll see you guys at the graveyard. You know,
start seeing the Titanic music start playing.
Yeah. So it definitely a deserved change. All right.
Can we put a clip of that in the actual video right there?
There you go.
Yeah, we'll fix it in post-production, definitely. Okay, Jack, do you have any specific things that you want to talk about any specific healers? Like, if you have any, do you have any ideas for, you know, any of the specs? I know you're a Holy Priest fan, for instance. Is there anything that you would do to adjust specs like Holy Priest for both Raid or M+?
Oh, this is like a manifesto time.
Yeah,
we're talking just about raiding.
You could talk about Raid, Mythic Plus. You could talk about 0 to 100 different healer topics, and anything you like, because you're such a knowledgeable source for this sort of thing.
I think if they want to start improving for 8.3 for raiding specifically, they need to start giving a little bits of extra utility to different classes. So the Artifice of Time essence will give like haste to targets that you heal as a healer. Maybe adding some sort of baseline passive to Holy Priest's Mastery, because basically it's like if you heal somebody, you give them a hot. So you pretty much put it on everybody all the time. Having some sort of way to buff other people's damage so that even if Holy Priest isn't doing passive damage, they're increasing other people's passive damage would be particularly good, especially because we're going on to more rot fights. If we were looking at a lot of encounters that were just straight burst damage, then maybe they needed to give some baseline damage reduction. Something along the lines of like the lenience buff that Discipline Priests can have or can talent into, giving 2 or 3% damage reduction to everybody, I think would also be pretty helpful for just the raw utility they could get. I think it's tough to be able to buff Resto Druid for raids without just making them more insane than they already are for M+.
I think everybody's at that point too, where you look at Resto Druid and you're like, man, they suck in raid, and you just like, You look at anything that would actually affect them in raid, and you're like, man, that would make them OP in Mythic Plus. What the hell?
Yeah, I think that you have to go in the direction of like next expansion completely changing their mastery, but in the short term, nerfing that, buffing tranquility, making like 2-minute trank, for example, more valuable, allowing them to move while tranking again, and then start putting in some targeted nerfs to photosynthesis, which is one of their talents for life bloom interaction. If they have life bloom on their self, their hots tick faster. If they put it on somebody else, they can get extra life bloom procs on them, which is just even more single target healing. That's just so flexible and so insane for M+. I think they need to target that for a nerf. And then finally for Rested Druid, they need to nerf the Raging Affix and make it so that Soothe cannot remove.
Dude, why is Soothe why is
it's
his
so
rage
good.
dispellable? Like,
it's so good.
I mean, it's
like,
also just a mechanic outside of the Raging Affix. Like there's the mobs like the Shadowborn Champions and KR that have a stacking and rage that if you don't have a Soothe in the group, you just can't get rid of. It just keeps going on and on until it gets ridiculous.
Like they should make it so that enrage itself doesn't stack. So that way it becomes kind of like Dispel Magic for Priest, where it's like, yeah, it's nice to be able to have a spammable Dispel onto this mob.
Yeah.
But you're not completely screwed if you don't do it, right? I mean Charlie, you're doing MDI. You probably found a lot of times in Underrot or King's Rest where you're like, it'd be nice if we had a Blood Elf, but I can still deal with it, right? There's
exactly,
recourse.
Yeah.
There is not recourse when you have a 2-stack or 3-stack enrage on a champion in King's Rest. You're just dead.
Well, yeah, it's because also the enrage affix just doesn't make any sense either. Like, why is that dispellable? Yeah. It was fine last expansion with raging not being dispellable because it felt like all the mobs were kind of okay even while they were enraged. A lot of the time it could have been problematic, but most of the time it was just okay. You had to just be a little bit more hesitant. Right now, you have something like a Ludwig von Tortolin, Shadow of Zul, basically any mini boss ever like enraged. You're just like, what the hell?
Shadow of Zul and Rage is kind of insane. Like, if you can't suit that, then you're just done. Unless you had the largest brain in the world and kited and dropped the dot perfectly at 30%. But that's kind of like out of the question for the average run.
I mean, you just need perfect play. It just massively punish. A lot of times I think that you should, like M+ utility should be like an amalgamation of small benefits that make for a good run.
Yeah, not like, these like binaries.
Yeah, like Binding Shot in itself is like really cool, but you don't need Binding Shot to be able to deal with something. Having Ursula's Vortex is really nice for something. They don't need to have it. Single target dispels as well.
Yeah, it feels like Entangling Roots, Soothe, Battle Res. These are all things that it's just your group either has it or you don't have it. And when you don't have it, you're like, what am I supposed to do about this pull?
I don't think Entangling Roots in of itself is actually mandatory, but I do think you need either a Monk with Ring of Peace to be able to decide,
one of the
or
two.
You need Entangling Root. You have to have one or the other.
Or Polymorph, to be fair. Polymorph does kind of fit that, although depending on the mage you're playing with. Some mages will be like, I'm not doing that. My combustion's off cooldown. Yeah,
I would rather
wipe.
We've all been there. It's the reverse Tettles. Tettles instead is just like, I'd rather just use all my globals on handling this thing.
Like, at least that mechanic you can bring with other classes, because let's say Jack plays his Disc Priest, he can get that from having a Bounce Druid and a Brewmaster in the group, but he can't get a Soothe unless he specifically has a Boomkin or a Hunter and no tank as a Soothe, so he has to get that from the DPS class, and there's only one range spot, so it's like super limited.
Yeah, so I mean, like the element of scarcity is like ridiculously high. Like we probably wouldn't be complaining about the soothing effect, for example, if we had like 4 or 5 classes with soothes instead of just literally 2, right? We wouldn't be worried about battle reses if it was only 4 classes, that had battle reses instead of out of the 12, you have 7 or 8, it's always just like an element of, what's that?
Or if it was a racial, like if there was a racial that would de-soothe mobs similar to Arcane Torrent, how that's an offensive purge, like you would be okay.
If there was an racial effect that would remove them, if there's an engineering item that would remove raging effects, if there was potions that you could use to dispel poisons or disease effects, as another example.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Purification potion.
So that way, Purification potion only removes 1 stat.
Yeah, I
tried it. I tried it. Trust me. I fucking looked through the entire list. I bought some like ridiculously old classic potions, and I gave them to my tank, and I was like, here you go, we're going into Siege of Borealis, no poisonous spells. Try this. It removes 1 stack, instantly gets oh my god.
Meanwhile, there's like a scroll that covers an entire class buff.
Yeah, there's a scroll that covers an entire class buff, right? Ooh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, we'd like to see some balance around that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like an element of scarcity that there's so many different massively useful forms of crowd control that are a must-have on specific weeks, and you feel incredibly punished if you don't have it, to the point where regardless of somebody's score, regardless of somebody's skill, you just don't bring them because they don't bring that utility.
Do you think offensive purge is mandatory?
No. It's helpful. It's helpful, but it's not mandatory. Like, as an example, it's really helpful in Waycrest Manor if you have soul fetishes are getting off. But your tank can always just kite, right? They're able to slow those mobs, you're able to stun those mobs, you're able to deal with them.
Almost all of them, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
you can kick also.
You can always pick who it goes on as well. So if you do have a rune carver, or you do have one of the larger witches that you can't slow, then you say, well, we have a soul fetish that we know is going off. Kill the witch really quickly, and it goes to Tree Man, and then we can kite Tree Man, right?
You could definitely play around it. Like in MDI, everyone was Alliance and hardly ever had offensive dispels in the group. Like some pulls were insanely hard because of that. Say the first pull and under out the mask pull at the beginning plus the matron pet is very hard without an offensive dispel, but it's still doable, and everyone did the pull.
Yeah.
I feel like the mask pull is pretty similar to the King's Rest in Rage, where like it's really hard without a Soothe, but you can get away with it in MDI because it's a slightly lower key and it's very well coordinated.
Are you referring to the Soothe that's going to be on the mask, or are you referring to Gift of Gahoon getting off?
Gift of Gahoon, and well, so that pull was tricky because you had to have 2 dedicated kicks to both heals from the priests. You had to have a 3rd dedicated kick for the mask one-shot the group mechanic, and that leaves 1 kick left on the tank for kicking a bolt that might kill him when 2 go off at once. So you had no kicks for the Gift of the Gahoon. You had to rely on stuns or just killing them before they got it off.
Okay, I understand. That makes sense. I didn't know what you were referring to specifically.
Yeah,
that pull is kind of complex.
It seems like an offensive purge there is about as valuable as a Soothe against the big things in King's Rest, because you can kite those also technically if you need some counterplay against them.
Sure, but I think it's like the stacking effect of the Enrage and King's Rest. If it was just one...
Yeah, it's definitely pretty unfair. I don't know, it feels like there's a couple dungeons where offensive purge is like, you really do want it for a high key, like you would go out of your way to make sure you have one in your group, but that's kind of, there are a lot more dungeons and a whole affix like that for Soothe.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the state of healers. We could definitely talk about this for hours.
Yes, we could.
But we're not going to. You're going to have to catch Jack's podcast about just healers that he does every time he streams.
Yeah, we'll have a podcast where we look up YouTube videos who make tier lists of how good healers are. And,
watch his tier list video on stream.
I didn't.
Oh no!
But I might.
Oh
but
no!
I
Man.
might.
What did you think about it? Did you see it at all yet?
I just I skipped ahead to where he made like the tier list, and I was like, this bitch.
Yeah, I actually put in a question from chat about that earlier. Is there anything you would change about Dragnos' tier list? Just like a short and sweet?
I mean, I don't think that there's that big of a I think that's the most extreme example of like where there's a big gap. So if you guys didn't see it, it was like S tier, Rested Druid. There was no A tier, and then it was like Pally and Monk at B, and then like Disc was like D or something like that, right? I think that's like the most extreme week. If we're in like a Raging Affix or something along those lines, or groups are really struggling with dealing with like, Enchanted Emissaries or something along those lines. But I think in the more general state, especially since everybody gorges themselves on pushing keys for 1 week and then takes weeks that they just nap, I think that Disc can definitely be brought up to a higher level. Like, because everyone runs on the easiest weeks, right? So yes, in the hardest weeks possible where you need everything, then yeah, Rested Druid will be far head and shoulders above everybody, right?
Hold on, wait, most situations. On the Void Week. Give me
Schism Cycloid, all right? It's dead. I'll out DPS the DPSers with the Void Emissaries, okay?
Yeah, if that third cast is going off, Barrier is one of the best things you could be doing there. It's not bad against Voids.
Cast.
Yeah.
Like, I think Disc more than has the tools to be able to heal the content these days, and I think it's only going to get a little bit better. It's just the utility right now. If they don't do something about the raging affix, if they don't do something about poison dispels, there's a couple of like small things that add up to a lot, basically.
Yeah, and it's actually really tough to like factor all these things in when you're making a tier list.
Yeah.
Like, what are you supposed to do about the fact that like there's grievous affix, there's raging affix? What are you supposed to do about the fact that like some groups have a balanced druid and some groups don't? So I think it's definitely
I actually went with like all the safest Azurite, traits, talents, essences, trinkets, everything. I had like 9% baseline leech for Grievous week. I was like, well, it's a push week, so we're going in. It's all right. It's all right.
You're like 3K, aren't you?
Almost there.
Yeah,
That's not bad at all.
That is a lot of work when the amount of work a Resto Druid has to do for that affix is zone into the dungeon.
I know. Well, season 2, I was like getting close to 3K again on my priest, and then since it was like super easy to gear up a character, I made my druid, geared it up, and then within like a month I passed it. I was like, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I mean,
why?
Yeah, Resto Druid starts out at 2,600 right now. It's just how it is.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Connected to your Raider IO, and it just instantly puts you in the bracket.
Yeah.
That's
all
right.
these friends that like that usually dodge you for keys suddenly are interested again as well.
Oh, actually, yeah, that was absolutely the case. Like, log in and people like, oh, you want to bring your druid to the XYZ super key? And I'm like, oh, I really need that one of my priests. They're like, yeah, about that.
But you're a priest.
Yeah, we wanted your druid.
Yeah, how about we do it with the druid first, and then sometime with a different group and somebody else's key, you can do it on your priest.
We'll go later.
Yeah.
It's the same problem that rogue or non-rogue players have when they roll their rogue. My friend Shift gets asked like every day if he wants to do keys on his rogue, and he's like, no, I want to do keys on my
Only mage. No rogue, only mage.
Okay, so let's move on to our next topic here for this week, which is the corrupted system. I guess there are 2 corrupted systems, which is really lame. I wish they'd called one of these 2 things a different word, because I want the word corrupted to be able to refer to something unique, but I guess that's just too much to ask. We'll start off with corrupted gear, which is the Titanforge replacement, and we've learned a lot more about this in the past week. So the way it works is that if an item would Titanforge, or I guess Warforge, instead it's going to roll a corruption on it, which there's a bunch of these like positive affixes that it can roll, like increased crit damage is the really big one. And then there's a bunch of like, you get extra haste from all sources, you get extra verse from all sources. There's some weird defensive ones as well, like some avoidance stuff as well. And then it comes with a drawback too, which is a corruption stat. One thing that we've just learned from Ian Hazakostas on Twitter is that the corruption stat is no longer random within each tier. Instead, it's going to be static within each tier. Which is going to remove a significant amount of the RNG, actually, that was associated with this on PTR.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah,
But-
I was rolling, I was setting up a leech set for raid testing, and you would have it where you could get like 5 corruption and 2% leech, or you could get like 12 corruption and 2% leech, right? So if you continually spammed the vendor to be able to get whatever you wanted, I put together like a 22% leech set or something like that for raid. Like, there was so much variance to it, so I'm glad they made that change so that it'll be just static.
That would have been rough. I agree.
It seemed like there were just too many RNG factors stacking on those pieces of gear. I think this change and maybe one more change, it'll seem like it'll be less stressful to get the right gear.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like
See as we
Benthic
go.
and Titanforge had a baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, which, if you think about 2 systems that you'd want to get together, maybe not the 2.
I really want Warfronts and Island Expeditions to get together and have a baby.
All right, that's banned. Never say that.
That's quite enough,
Tettles' face
Tettles.
has been banned from the Titanforge podcast.
Yeah.
We're cutting that out of the VOD.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think that the corruption system is pretty interesting. The fact that it comes with this, like, you have to both set your corruption budget and then decide what you're going to do to like actually reach that corruption budget within your gear. I think it's actually going to be a pretty interesting gearing challenge. I think it's going to be the first tier in a long time where you can't easily sim yourself as a DPS person and not do some thinking about how much corruption you're willing to take on. So I like that side of it for itemizing. Jack, for healers in particular as well, do you have any insight into like how much corruption might be a safe amount from your testing so far?
Whenever you gain any sort of increased corruption, every 20 corruption, you're gaining like a new effect to it. So it starts off with like a slow from 0 to 19. 20 to 39 is like the doom cloud that deals damage to you, that expands and deals more damage and the more corruption you have. The next tier is like the little squid that'll chase you and do like a nuke to you. So as long as you're staying below 60, 60 is where you get that increased damage taken and reduced healing taken effect. As long as you stay below that, I don't think it was that big of a deal. I think the most scary thing is one of these days we're going to have a weak aura for finding out when the little squid's going to chase us. But finding that out or being able to pop a defensive for it, we'll have to see how tightly tuned some of those healing encounters are. Because for most of the rot fights, if you take an extra 50, 100k or something like that, when you're at 75 neck and decked out mythic EP level, it wasn't that big of a deal to take an extra hit here and there. But if we get any burst fights, you take 80, 90k additional damage, you're just absolutely dead if it's going to be too tightly tuned.
Yeah, I'm pretty worried about that as a tank too. Getting the random slow as a tank in keys is very concerning, and that's like baseline for any corruption.
Yeah, and
like I'll just
it
be
is
running out of attack
dispellable,
and then,
but
I got slowed. I'm dead.
Tiger's Lust.
Yeah.
You can dispel it, but making sure your healer doesn't already have it on cooldown for something else.
Yeah,
It's a little scary.
Easy to imagine that being a problem in keys because, like, unlike in raid with keys, we're just going to keep raising the level of the key until everything is almost lethal. So adding like a little bit of damage to the environment starts to be a real problem there.
Yeah, it's also
that.
You go ahead.
Oh, that and the level of like damage you can deal to the mob's HP relative to how much HP that you gain. So whenever you're able to continue pushing higher and higher keys because you have so much damage, so much power there, but then bosses start one-shotting you, especially if you're wearing lower eye level but strong effects. So like people are talking about in chat about the crit damage effect, having how powerful that is for a lot of DPSers. And if you're spamming Mythic Plus all day and you're getting heroic level crit damage effects and stacking those, but then you're getting one shot by bosses because you don't have enough stamina, is kind of a problem. I really hope that they add like bonus stamina to Azurite like they did in Battle for Dazar'alor.
I mean that would be a major concern of mine too. But not only that, but the fact that you just don't know what the secondary modifier is going to be going into getting the piece is fairly problematic too. I didn't mind the stuff that was in Crucible of Storm that had like the secondary effects on it because you kind of knew what you were getting beforehand. You knew if it was actually worth wearing or not. But now with like, man, like having to write a guide for Wowhead, Jack, like you and I have to spend. We're gonna have to have like a fucking lexicon of like what to wear and what not to wear and what situation it's actually worth wearing this stuff. Like we're gonna
those
have
will
to
be hard questions to answer.
Well,
pages.
If it makes it to live the way it is now, the answer is just going to be crit damage only. Like use all your corruption budget on crit damage.
Okay, defining crit budget is going to take a corruption budget is going to be just ridiculous.
I think the corruption budget is like 59 maximum for most raid fights, 39 maximum for some, and in Mythic Plus probably stay below 19 maybe. Those looked like the breakpoints to me, but I don't know. I'm sure Raidbots is going to have an option where you can just sim yourself and put in like a max corruption across your top gear, and then that'll do it for you. I bet.
Yeah, true. Yeah, whoever does Raidbots does a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do. I saw a screenshot of the mage stuff that they've been calculating the bonuses from all the crit gear and all that. The 6% crit damage increase corrupted bonus is currently worth 80 eye levels on a piece of gear in the mage community for both frost and fire. That just,
oh my god,
that's insane. I mean, that needs to be nerfed straight up if it's worth 80 eye levels over it.
And to be fair,
those are removed.
Those are two of the specs that are most interested in picking up crit damage, but they're like most specs are getting at least 40 or 50 item levels of value out of that crit damage affix compared to like 5 or 10 for most of the haste and verse and stuff, like those stat bonuses too. Mm-hmm. Even if you go even if all your gear is like haste gear and you get a increased haste from all sources, it's not that much haste, 2% or whatever.
I mean, mythic boots were worth like 35 for Moonkin, so like,
yeah.
Dude, and this is even more crit damage, so I don't even know how this is going to be a thing.
It seems like it's got to get nerfed.
Are sockets on gear this patch? Like, I don't think anybody's seen.
I don't know yet either.
I've seen one of the raid testing bosses that died dropped a socketed corrupted piece in a screenshot that I saw. So
no,
we'll see.
That's even worse, right? Because so like another issue is that you can't just flat out remove jewel crafting. You can't just like remove a major profession like that. So I don't know.
Guarantee it on rings and cloaks, and then we're all happy. Please.
I would. That would be okay. I'd be okay.
I would like that a lot. I just think this new system is funny because it's replacing the system that kind of gets out of hand where you get a plus 30 eye level Titanforge, but now it's a new system that makes an item worth 80 eye levels, more than double 30 eye levels.
Yeah, it's also got some interesting implications for Mythic Plus, right? Like people who gear exclusively from Mythic Plus. On the one hand, like those people on live right now are able to get max Titanforges at least, and like a lot of socketed gear just because they're rolling so many times. And that's no longer going to be possible to get like mythic item level gear except out of your weekly box. On the other hand, if this crit damage affix is like the only thing worth getting, and if sockets can also roll randomly on those, then it seems like spamming Mythic Plus to get heroic level crit socketed pieces is going to be extremely worthwhile for raiders, right? Like if this system makes it to live as it is now, I would expect everybody's going to spend the first couple weeks of the expansion just jamming Mythic Plus to get those rolls for raid.
Oh yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as it stands because I know there's a lot of uproar in like the M Plus community for people who primarily do Mythic Plus. That end game farm for them is going to be a lot tougher, and they won't be able to get that stamina. They won't be able to get the better gear, and that I think raises the biggest point. Is I very much believe that doing the hardest content should give you the best gear. But that being said, it really leaves people who run high M Plus who do a raid group that raids for an hour every week and then doesn't raid any other time. Like some of people are just like completely left in the cold. I'm just saying you're just completely left out in the cold onto this one. So there's no proper reward for people who run high end plus, which has an equivalent difficulty as the high end mythic rating.
Yeah, there might be this.
To quantify
that. Well, one of the really weird things is like it seems like next patch the best mythic plus gear is going to come from raid because it's high stamina. And the best raid gear is going to come from Mythic Plus because you can just keep spamming until you get those sockets and the right corruption affixes.
That's for early progression because it depends on where the item level of the gear from Mythic Plus is actually going to be. For early prog, yeah, pretty much everybody's going to have like max corruption sets. But then once you actually start getting whatever the 445 equivalent, the Mythic level equivalent is in every single slot, then there's no way that Mythic Plus gear can even compete.
Well, Mythic Plus gear, if crit is an affix, is worth 80 item levels or whatever, then that's going to be worth it until you roll a crit corruption on a Mythic raid piece. And
well, yeah, you can get it on Mythic raid piece.
Yeah, but it's hard to do. Like there's one crit bonus affix among like 10 affixes, so you need to roll an item, have it be corrupted, and then have the corruption be that 1 in 10 for crit.
Yeah, well, it depends on how. I guess if you're looking for the perfect amount of crit damage, then yeah, it could be an issue. But I would assume that like 0.1% crit damage isn't worth 80 item levels, right? 0.1% crit damage may only be worth like 7 item levels, which you'd actually rather wear the mythic piece over.
Yes. Yeah, I mean
I just think that later in the tier, I think the mythic pieces are going to have a significantly greater advantage than they would this season per se, because it's more likely that you'll have the mythic base eye level plus the affix that you want later in the season, rather than at the front you get the good mythic plus gear and maybe get some good affixes on those before the raid gears pop.
It's also worth.
I think a lot of times
it's
about control as well, like being able to say, all right, after farming mythic for weeks and weeks and weeks, then I'll be able to get something onto that end. But if you're only doing half of the bosses early on mythic, and then the rest of the time is mythic plus, you're going to have a lot lower chance of catching up to some of those other guys who are mythic raiders. Yeah. So like the fact we don't know what's going to happen with like the mythic plus chest every week. But you don't want to be able to have spammable mythic eye level gear out of M plus. So being able to find the right reward for high M plus players or even high end PvPers, because they're just as screwed in this situation as well.
I think it should actually be gated behind the bonus roll somehow, because I feel like if you like bonus roll like end of dungeons or you bonus roll in like end of match, you should be able to get like a mythic equivalent.
That's a cool fix. Yeah,
at like certain rating or at like certain dungeon level.
Just make the bonus roll key off the weekly chest value, not the end of dungeon value for whatever key level you did.
Yeah, like let's say you do a 15 in time, then you're able to bonus roll like a base mythic eye level piece of gear by chance.
Yeah,
I don't know. I could see that
because the issue with Mythic Raid is that it's lockout based, so you don't want to bump up like end of match rewards for PvP or end of dungeon rewards for Mythic Plus. You would rather it be gated behind the weekly chest, but the weekly chest for both PvP and Mythic Plus just isn't a quantifiably enough gear, like raw amount of gear that you're actually getting compared to like loot lockouts for a full raid instance. Especially, oh man, we have a 12 boss raid instance. We have 12 attempts at getting good 445 equivalent pieces.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, otherwise you're using it for raid, so it's just a cost analysis strategy as to like what do you think is going to actually be worth for you. I'm on.
I think that seems like the most reasonable system, but I think that it's probably not going to get implemented. I think that we're just going like Mythic Pluses. I think are just going to be screwed next batch, and you're just gonna have to pick up Mythic Raid.
Yeah, I mean, even then, I think a lot of early bosses have a lot of optimal pieces for classes. I mean, we've seen, first 3 raids of this expansion so far, or I guess Ny'alotha and Eternal Palace in particular had a lot of like really good early Azurite. They had a lot of really good early trinkets as well for a number of classes that wasn't too terribly punished, but there's definitely a couple pieces like later on. I mean, good luck getting whatever's the new edict, right? Whoever's going to be trying to get like the new edict defensive trinket, or some of the later offensive trinkets. I mean, you locked the coral off of Ashvane, for example. Took a long time before people were able to start getting that boss down.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about like what is good enough as well too, because you don't have to be like fully decked out in like the absolute best. As long as you have what good enough is, then you're actually fine. And I actually think the residuum for Mythic Plusers is actually a pretty good system for them, because it allows them to get Mythic equivalent Azurite without having to raid Mythic and put in however many arduous hours doing progression.
Yeah, I think Residuum is fairly successful as a way to get Azurite.
Especially kind of like it if there was a currency that you get from doing dungeons or from raids. And then the higher level of the content you do, the more that you get. Wow. But there's like a weekly cap, so you can't get too much. And, then you could buy whatever kind of piece that you want, right? And they can call it Void Orbs. Void, yeah.
Void, yeah. Voider.
Flavor.
But then you have control. They have control, and then, you got to pick and choose what you want to buy.
I'd like that too. I'd really like them to equalize or make a catch-up mechanic for both sides of players so they can kind of get to the same level if they do as hard of content as the other. So several of these ideas I'm a fan of.
All right, so in addition to these corrupted items, we also have a new Mythic Plus affix, a new seasonal affix, also called Corrupted. Thank you, Blizzard.
Hey!
So let's do a quick little overview of exactly how this works. And here is a link in chat and in the description of wherever you're watching this to this Wowhead article explaining exactly how this works. Basically, within each dungeon, there are going to be 4 obelisks, and we're not quite sure yet if they're on a weekly rotation. My suspicion is that there will be a weekly pattern system, as they've done for Infested and Beguiling. But I guess there's a chance that there will not be. But if they repeat that pattern, it will be a 3-week cycle where each of these obelisks are placed. They're actually different. Each obelisk is different, like they have a unique name, and each one is associated with a specific guardian. And then when you touch the obelisk, it becomes a one-way portal into Ny'alotha's realm, and it spawns the associated guardian. When you kill that guardian, its obelisk and its corpse turn into 2-way portals into and out of Ny'alotha's realm. So what that means is if you use an obelisk, you have to kill the thing associated with it to get back outside. But there are some ways that you can get around, like, that you have to, in order to use an obelisk, you have to be out of combat, but you can get around this with clever use of like vanish and stuff. It's a really wide open system. There's a lot of potential for clever skips and optimized routes based on what your group comp is and which specific packs you want to skip. It looks like it's going to be pretty easy to skip any pack that is not directly adjacent to an obelisk if you want to. However, if there is a pack directly adjacent to an obelisk, you're going to have a hard time skipping that one unless you are playing with Shadow Melds and Vanishes that make that possible to hit that obelisk without it.
I'm sure we'll see lots of creativity on that one before you move on. I think there's going to be lots of ways to go around that. Like maybe we use 4 CCs, a ring apiece, and then someone like knocks them and suicides even, and then the rest of the group can go down without being in combat. Something like that may be possible. I don't know. We'll see all kinds of creativity. But go ahead.
Yeah, it is really exciting. And you also, it's not like you have to go to all 4 of the obelisks, right? You can pull 1 or maybe 2 of these. Like, whichever guardians you don't engage throughout the dungeon, you will fight with the last boss. But you fight them in a sort of nerfed form. Every guardian has like a unique set of abilities, and they summon some armies when you fight them with an obelisk. They will just port to the end boss if you haven't killed them by then, and they won't do their army cast. So it's kind of optimal to fight as many of them with the last boss as possible. However, the way that they work, it really kind of spirals out of control how much you have to manage the more you're fighting at once. So it seems like with most end bosses, you're probably not going to be able to do more than 1 guardian with them.
Well, just jumping in, I think there's only 1 lieutenant mob that's actually doable with most end bosses, and it's that big, it's Blood of the Corruption. It's that blob that does the ground effect. That's the area denial. Obviously, it's kind of end boss dependent. There's stuff like Unbound Abomination that boss is just kind of a joke in general. So you could probably do most of the lieutenant mobs with him, but by and large, the only lieutenant mob that's going to be doable with some of the bosses is Blood of the Corruption.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found the Void Weaver was pretty easy as well. Just cycles between a curse cast and a disease cast, and it really wasn't that bad at all.
So what level of dungeon
I think it really
were you
depends on the
doing it
dungeon.
on?
Yeah, we're doing like 15s or something like that. It wasn't too terribly heavy.
So we did it on so we were messing around a little bit on a 20, and we were getting hit for a little bit over 75% of our health by the initial cast. And whenever that comes into play, it just becomes like a really easy way for you to just get one shot by just like random incidental damage that's associated with the fight. Because if you're dropping below 50% health, like you are in a really bad spot.
You're in really big trouble.
Yeah, just think about something like
you always had kicks though. Is it like guaranteed? I mean, we had prop paladin because Fleet was tanking, but is it always guaranteed that you're getting some of those casts off?
It's a 3-second cast, so if you have 3 melee kicks and a range kick, you should be able to keep that locked out, or you should be able to keep that kicked as long as you're kicking late. I think, pretty reliably for at least
on the boss.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last boss of Tettles does have 1 15-second kick required on the boss,
right? That will cause some Void Weaver kicks to go through. Although maybe you'll have people on your group that you can let casts go through on. Like if you really were planning for this and you had like a rogue and a mage in your group, you could be like, all right, you know, once we have a kick on cooldown, we are going to let anything go through on a rogue with cloak.
Yeah. I would say that she's probably the second most likely. It just depends on if the boss needs kicks or not.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that there might be more. Well, I want to say emissaries, but obelisk minions that are going to be doable with certain last bosses, especially if they tune their abilities a little lower. Some of these abilities that they do right now are very overpowered, in my opinion, and they should be nerfed. Like the Tank Buster hit should not hit for 750k on a 20 already. They bump up the dungeon scale.
Like it was a 15, and like the tank was getting chunked, and I was like, why? Like that was something that was really weird, and it emphasized how hard you just like grab aggro on it and just run. But it was also weird because it takes away a little bit of the choice that you would have of having a penalty that seems fair, but not going to like say it is absolutely impossible for you just to bring this guy onto the last boss with you. You know, there's got to be some kind of middle ground.
I would say that Blood of the Corruption is in a similar spot where the ground effect does a lot of damage to you if you're actually standing in it, whereas Void Weaver, Malthier, and then that Tank Buster, like letting a cast go through on the Void Weaver or that Tank Buster hitting your tank just seems like the initial damage on it is just a little bit high. So I think it's going to get changed. Also, the fact that they're like enraging and stuff like that seems a bit...
Enraging effects.
We go through this with every affix, every seasonal affix, right? They're just like, whoops, this is affected by the other ones. We'll fix that.
There's a list of problems that they always have on these new affixes that they need to be fixed, and they do get fixed usually. But this time, at least they remembered to give them count right off the bat. So
this time it doesn't even matter that they give count, though. You have to kill them anyway, so it kind of is irrelevant whether or not they give count.
That's
they
true.
give count, and they don't scale off fortified or tyrannical. They only scale off dungeon difficulty.
Which is good,
So
yeah.
At least I got that right.
Yeah.
But the fact that they're affected by raging and I assume bolstering and everything else that it goes with that
Bursting.
is kind of bad.
Also,
bursting, the tentacles bursted.
The fact that
growth burst.
the fact that the tank buster is spell reflectable as well is just ridiculous too. Like it does half the mob's health, and it's a physical tank buster, but for some reason it's spell reflectable. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's a physical spell. Yeah, it's reflectable. Also, the tentacles that spawn with the blob mini boss are also reflectable. The mind flay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can grab that, tell your group not to kick. That will like just negate one of the tentacles entirely.
Yeah, well, what if you go into the realm first and you wait?
First?
Yeah, you wait for them all to cast on you, and you hit the mass reflect.
God,
yeah,
man. I'm gonna have
The
to
warrior returns.
The move, baby. Bring back Prot Warrior.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, it's nice to see them make an affix that's going to be good for Prot Warrior.
Yeah, great.
Sloot sad again.
Well, it actually okay. To be fair, it looks like it's going to be pretty good times for Prot Paladin too.
I think Pally's going to be sick in raid for what it's worth.
Yeah, that's
there's a lot of testing for Prot Paladin be really.
In general, though, this corrupted affix, like, it's really exciting from a planning of dungeons perspective, right? You just see this map with 4 obelisks on it. There's so much options that opens up. So I love this affix from a theoretical perspective. And
Me too.
Yeah, I think
it's going to foster a ton of creativity. But yeah, that's all I was going to say. Good.
I think that's one of the things is like there's some issues with it, and I mean, no surprise, there's going to be issues every time that a new affix comes into play. If they start addressing those quickly early, I think it'll be a great affix, not only for the fact that you will have a lot of creativity in some of your routes, but also that you're able to more easily pick and choose. And it's one of those things that's like it's very consistent. It's not really hard to deal with these guys like in a nutshell, just by themselves or something like that. It eats up a lot of time. It's very time consuming to click the obelisk, run down, kite it to wherever you want, kill it off. But it's consistent across the board. And hopefully when we start seeing some of the other rotations, if there are other rotations for the obelisks, and it doesn't feel punishing every single week, that there's just going to be a consistency across the board that you don't feel like you're getting screwed on the.
Something I want to point out is that the obelisk placement right now, it actually feels like they're in every single dungeon except for a Taldazar. It felt like they're all in really good spots, and they had I don't want to say a clear understanding of where people are trying to skip, but at least it felt like they were placed with explicit intent.
Motherlode was literally in the best places possible.
Yeah, exactly. You just look at Motherlode, you look at Freehold, you look at Shrine of the Storm, you're just like, all right, they kind of know where they're putting these now. They even give you that one at the very beginning of Waycrest Manor in case you get top right and you want to go straight to the courtyard with the first obelisk. And I'm just like, all right, thank God. Hot dog.
They're very, very nice placements, which makes me wonder, though, if they're going to do multiple different weekly rotations.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
they might not
put all of the nicest places in Motherlode, or do we have a week where they're all in horrible locations or something?
They could just do
maybe
this.
This is just the good push week.
Well, they could do the same locations, but different obelisks in each spot. Like maybe one week it's the Brutal Spire in that spot, and the next week it's the Curse Spire or whatever in the same spot.
I like that. That would actually be fine for rotational.
I like that a lot.
If it's a different mob, because then it would actually dictate whether or not you can do the mob with the end boss, because if it's adjacent to a trash pack that you have to do, then you won't do that with the end boss.
My favorite thing about this is that the casual groups, that one of the things that casual groups kind of hate is that each week you have to relearn the pattern that's active, and that will not be true if they just change which spires everywhere, because the casual groups are just going to do all 4 spires. And then the hardcore groups are going to get this unique experience each week where, okay, we're always going to be skipping we never want to do the defiled spire. So depending on where they put that, our route changes each week. So I think it would be a really cool, synthesis of the 2 goals there.
Yeah, it'd also make it a lot easier if anybody was, providing a lot of routes to the community or something like that on popular websites for Mythic Plus and stuff like that. And be a lot less.
Yeah, that doesn't sound realistic. There's no way. Yeah. Undad TV in chat has a theory here. This is kind of like the Windows theory. You know how there's the Windows operating systems alternate between awful and great. XP was great, Vista was terrible, etc. Are there two different affix teams? You know, infested. Somebody made infested, and then a different team made reaping, and then that infested team made beguiling, and then the reaping team made corrupted. I don't know.
The reaping team is back.
Okay, so
Hopefully.
for what it's
I
worth,
feel
I
like
think
they're kind of like one team. It's like they're kind of going back and forth between. They're like, all right, well, infested was a shit show, so let's see if we can make something really easy. All right, that was too popular. That was too easy. Let's try to put it back a little bit. And then they're like, all right, screw it. It's the end of the expansion. Have fun. Go ahead.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I felt like beguiling didn't have enough like time for people to be able to test it. Whereas it feels like with corrupted, I think it's easy to speculate that the next tier is going to be coming out like mid-January. So if they have 4 months of testing, 3.5 months of testing or whatever, then they should have it pretty much hammered down.
Yeah, this looks fantastic. I'm really hyped actually for Keys next season.
Me too.
I can't wait for this affix.
What do we think about Shadow Meld in this affix setting?
I really want them to preemptively ban Shadow Meld for next season's MDI.
Really?
There's gonna be some stupid stuff that
I agree with that.
So I'm really concerned about double rogue or meld being almost mandatory for runs again, because you're going to have your DPS, your Resto Druid, your tank go into one portal. Your double rogue set's going to go off and hit a different obelisk on the opposite side of a map that's like on a trash pack that you really don't want that much. They're going to pull, one of the rogues is going to pull the mobs away. The other rogue's going to go in, click, activate that mob, run it to your 3-stack. Your rogue that pulled the trash is going to vanish it off and then run it all the way back, and then run all the way back to the other portal. And like right now, that seems like theoretically the best strategy for doing stuff like that, because whenever you're downstairs, you can actually get 2 of the mini bosses at once. And like once you actually go into that portal, that mob is eternally active in that downstairs phase. So Shadow Meld and Vanish may be super important again.
It might be, but they should also hopefully recognize that in advance, and they should add an empowerment if you have 2 active, or more than 1 active. Like give them 500% damage taken, or sorry, like damage dealt to the target. Like I think because some of those things would happen, and because they'd be so debilitating to the meta, they should preemptively add some restrictions to it. Because
I agree.
It's gonna be stupid. It's going to be stupid, even if you ban Shadow Meld. You're right. You just vanish it. It's going to be really stupid, and it's going to put together some like stupid cancerous comps.
Yeah, double rogue on Horde being the only comp you can play because you don't have a Shadow Meld available would be miserable again. Like that's just like the least fun.
Yeah, man, it sucked when everybody wanted to play with me. Those were rough days.
Open
I
up
like
your
to
rogue
yes.
list.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great idea actually to just make it so you can't, like, if you try and engage 2 lieutenants at the same time, you're just dead. Because even if you can't do that,
unless they come into the reality realm. Right?
Yeah, but the last boss it should be
boss.
okay.
Okay.
That seems like.
I'd like to like figure out how to do 2 with the boss at the same time. So
Yeah,
I think that's a fair challenge, because that's really difficult, really punishing, and everything like that. And it's not requiring some cancerous comp in order to do it. You just need a lot of kicks depending on what's going on. But when you're having 2 at once because you have some stupid hyper niche composition to do it, it's no thanks.
Even without that as well, rogues would still be useful for these. Like, you would still want to go and vanish activate far obelisks after you've gotten your first couple of rifts down, if you don't want to go and deal with the pack that's next to it. So like I feel like rogue vanish and just Shadow Meld in general would still be good without that, but they would be just less mandatory and more like nice utility. I don't know.
You can activate them for the downstairs realm, and then you could just like go into like an in portal somewhere, then go get that guy cross map and like kill him somewhere else. It doesn't matter too much. Like that's fine. But it comes back to like the unique utility thing that Jack was talking about with Soothe at the beginning of the episode. Like that's just too far.
Yeah. So speaking of an MDI setting, that Shadow Meld is so warping, right? Like every MDI team right now is playing only classes that can be Night Elves, so that they can all be Night Elves, or Rogues, I guess, because Vanish works too. However, the meta is a little bit less, locked in than it was during Season 2. We are seeing more than 1 comp, which is good. We're seeing double Unholy sometime. I expect that we're going to see actually a lot of Unholy in the like, because Underrot has Reaping active. in
Yeah.
this. So that's
Yeah.
gonna
Freehold, right?
yeah. Underrot and Freehold both have reaping active. I would expect to see a large amount of Unholy Death Knights for those for those dungeons.
The real question is, do we see Rogue for those dungeons at all?
I'm sure we do.
Do
we see Rogue in the MDI?
Well,
I think so. Tricks of the Trade alone is
It
too
isn't-
much. that you
Imagine
need
a
for
comp with
Holy
double
Decays.
Unholy Death Knight and then a demon hunter for the magic damage buff.
yeah, that's somewhat compelling.
Honestly, I
don't
would
even
say
know if
no
we're gonna
immediately
use it.
because of Tricks of the Trade. Like, it's so hard to get threat over 2
Mhm.
Unholy DKs anyway, even with Tricks and a prot where you're doing max damage.
What about you play a prop pally and you just bubble taunt?
Can't be a night elf. There you
Yeah,
go.
but you
Yep.
don't need to be an idol. Like we're already talking
Back
about
to
cutting a
square one.
rogue. How important can rogues or can Shadow Meld be in those dungeons?
Well, if you're
You
cutting
watch
the
these
rogue,
guys
the
and
reason
know.
why you can cut the rogue is because you're a night elf.
Yeah, but you just have Unholy Death Knights in your group. It doesn't matter what you pulled; it's all dead. I'm not
Phone
a.
salute. Phone salute.
I'm not
know about
actually
that.
advocating
I
for
don't know
this.
about that.
Yeah, that's actually banned. We don't do that. Yeah. One spec that we might see though is Mistweaver Monk, especially again the Underrot looks like a really great place for Mistweaver. Revival has just a ton of utility there, and disease dispels. Way of the Crane being
pretty
something that provides damage and healing in those unholy pulls too.
Yeah, pretty much like the highest trash density dungeons got reaping on it, which I think is a great idea because you want to be able to not only highlight an affix that was incredibly popular this expansion, but also see it in like the most polarizing scenario possible. So I think that's incredibly exciting. I think people are going to love to see that. And I going back to like the Shadow Meld conversation though, I can understand where it'll be fun and very interesting for players to be able to use and very liberating as well, so they can get past certain things. But it's also things that are in conflict with players might enjoy one thing, but then the audience might be able to gain something else out of what they're viewing, right? Because being able to look at other esports games in particular is saying, oh, let me try that strategy. Let me try that build in StarCraft. Let me try that build in League or whatever, right? Versus, oh, well, we don't have 5 Shadow Melds, so I guess we can't do that route.
Yeah, we can't replicate anything we just saw on stream. That's my biggest gripe about MDI this year was like anyone that asked me about my strategies for my team, I was like, well, we did this, but there's no way you could possibly do this on live unless you're a really specific niche of alliance players that all have Shadow Meld.
Right.
And I mean, there's a lot of guilds that, for example, will like be way over geared for the content and they'll do their 10 to 12 or something like that in a week. But maybe they want to try something new while they're doing it. They're like, oh, why don't we just try this route out and see how it works so we can do these crazy big pulls like these guys. But if you're already having a large barrier of entry for people to even experience or have a similar experience to the players, then I think it makes it a lot less relatable for people who might want to compete in the MDI in the future, and a lot less relatable to people who just want to see it to look at what they're doing, you know? Look at how they can improve their own play, I should say.
It seems like nerfing, like just banning Shadow Meld from Mythic Plus would go a long way towards, like anytime there's something as easy as that to do to make the esport more similar to the game that people play in real life, it seems like that's kind of a no-brainer to go with. But it's possible that the people making this decision don't really understand exactly how warping Shadow Meld is, because it's just so good in these kind of coordinated MDI settings.
I think they know at this point. I mean, I think it was one of those things that maybe they didn't anticipate being as heavy because we saw it very, very minimally in Legion. We saw it for like Blackrock Hold in particular. Maybe one other dungeon after that, but it wasn't very common because we had so many dungeons that were off the rails, that were very open and wide as to pick and choose what you wanted to do. Now that we've had a lot more dungeons that are on the rails and more affixes than ever that are artificial walls that you have to be able to break through with Shadow Meld, like Void Emissaries, it's made it even more powerful. And just like with Arcane Torrent, they never really make a move until the end of the expansion.
Yeah.
So I think that's the same thing is going to happen.
Yeah.
Torrent was also a big thing that kept groups horde side as well. Like that was so powerful, and now there's one overpowered racial instead of 2. Do you guys have any good?
Dwarf Racial and Arcane Torrent feel like they're on the similar scale of like how useful they are, and then it's just like Meld is just like 2 tiers. If we had to create a Dratna's tier list, Meld S tier,
Yeah,
Dwarf and Arcane Torrent B.
A tier.
yeah. No.
Really?
Empty. You gotta have an MDA. That's
All right.
that's a rookie mistake, Trell. As an experienced tier list maker, you can't just have an A tier when the S tier is that good. That's why I kept there no healers in the A tier, is because Resto Druid, it would be insulting to put anything within a tier of them, and I think it would be the same for Meld. Yeah,
Get wrecked.
I'll take that one. I'll take it. I think Boomkin should have been the A tier, by the way. But moving on.
Boomkin in the A tier. Yeah, I've had some aggressive lobbying for Boomkin being in the A tier. I think my main reason for that is like I've done a lot of keys with Tettles, and I think that's shaped my perception of Boomkin.
Yeah. So what disc priest have you run with though? Nobody. There's not enough on NA.
Aren't you like rank 1 world right now, Jack?
Nah. There's some alliance bros that are beating me, man.
Okay,
Yeah.
never mind. Okay, so if you chop them down and you give them the negative 300 IO modifier for being alliance, then are they?
Then it gets a little bit closer.
Mm-hmm. All right. Do you guys want to just make anybody got any bold predictions for teams to watch at BlizzCon? No points for saying Method EU, by the way, but just a team that you expect to overperform expectations. Tettles, do you have any teams you really like going into this tournament?
I actually think Buff War Nerf Rogue is significantly better than even the rest of the casting group actually believes. I think that we haven't seen them play versus any of the West Cup teams, so people don't really know what to expect. But I do believe that they've probably put in enough practice time to make a good run.
Do you believe that an East Cup team will take a map off of a West Cup team at this tournament?
I think so.
Okay.
What is it?
Mistakes.
It's Abra versus Buff War Nerf Rogue. Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe they'll take a map off Abra.
And
if they take the set off Abra, it would be because of Abra's mistakes, not necessarily Buff War's overperformance. But I do actually believe that Buff War Nerf Rogue is better than 40k.
Okay. All right. That's a hot take.
I'm kind of curious about 40k. Really, I mean, they're renaming because they got sponsors. They're going to be Games Revolted at BlizzCon when you see them, but they're incredibly polarizing. Like, they're obviously a very good team, a lot of Fat Shark Yes guys, and they kind of go back and forth between being absolute gods and between I'll just kind of take it easy. We don't really have to worry about that. Honestly, like the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
First 2 weeks they placed sixth, and then they finished seventh.
They did the tournament map, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't need to play these cups. We can just win the last one, and we'll be fine." And then they just came in and they won the last one. Like, there's no flaw in the logic.
I actually thought that was true until I thought they just like didn't practice at all until the last cup, so they made sure they beat us and got into the BlizzCon tournament. But after reading Lazelle's Radar IO article, I think they were just having some problems the first 2 cups, and then really pulled it together for the third.
Yeah, these inconsistencies are, I mean, it's just anytime there's so many moving parts in a Mythic Plus dungeon, it's so hard to be consistent across all 1,000 things you need to do right to avoid getting a wipe.
Yep. And that's the problem is, like, so week 3 they won it all. They crushed everybody. Well, they did very, and they showed how strong they can be. But just like in the Australia land, now they don't have Lazelle. Now they're missing some of their players. So they brought on Trill, who's obviously a great player in his own right. But no matter how good just one individual piece is, it's just an entire. This isn't baseball. You can't just like hire one of the best hitters out there and then just make your team better right away. You have to be able to have everybody working together, running dungeons constantly. And he's there for the full 2 weeks of practice, which is helpful. But I don't know if it's enough for them to like. I just don't know what to expect out of them. Right?
It's so
not only has the regular season been weird, their LAN was weird, and now we're going to BlizzCon where more roster changes, more weird things.
Yeah, it's just awkward because it took them so long to build synergy as a 5-stack for like the regular season, and then they like kind of overperformed the last cup. Are they going to start off slow? Are they going to like just get smacked and go 0-2? Are they going to overperform expectations? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows what they really expect.
I'm putting my money on Method NA.
Team.
Method NA, the boys. That's my pick. Rooting for those guys. It's going to be really fun to watch, though. Twitch.tv/Warcraft is the place to go to check out the MDI. It'll be live, I think, on Friday is when we'll be able to see. That will be all the action on Friday, right? Some of the action's happening off stream on Thursday, and then on Friday we're getting all the final matches live from BlizzCon. So
all 4 of us will be there live as well. The 2 people at the top will be casting, and Dratnos and I will be in the audience with our signs, maybe.
Uh-huh.
That makes sense. It's gonna have sense.
You'll be able to see Tettles and Jack on the broadcast, and me and Trell if we get the audience camera to pan over us, which we'll try to do. That will be.
Watch for my sign. It'll say "Delete Tolbigor."
I'm going to be holding up a Nerf Starfall sign, just loudly cheering Nerf Starfall.
What the hell?
Yeah.
There we go.
Awesome. So that's.
I think there's a total of 10 games. On Deb, since you're asking, I think it's a total of 10 games, but 4 are not streamed, and the grand finals of best of 5. So it's going to start at like noon Pacific on Friday, and then it's going to be like 8 to 10 hours, something like that. So, I mean, we're having interviews after every series. We're having like setup, and the setup for LAN takes a lot more time than it does for like online play. Getting everybody from, I think it's like the player practice areas like upstairs or something like that, and then they have to be able to come downstairs, get their warm-ups ready, and then they go back onto stage. So those things took a lot more time. Yeah, unfortunately, there's not like an opening week. Like I know AWC has had opening week previously, but I don't know how they would have enough studio space for. Like I think StarCraft is actually in Korea right now for their opening week equivalent. I think Overwatch League has something in California for their opening week. So it's just like a ton of different stuff.
Yeah, and then part of the issue is that we have to split studio time with AWC. So AWC is Saturday. It's just not enough time, right?
Yep. Not enough time, not enough resources in there.
Yeah, it's not like this is primarily an esports event, right? Primarily, this is a convention, a games convention that is having some of these tournaments run at it. So they're playing second fiddle in some cases to the needs of the whole convention. Evade asks, "What's the best way to get past the weapons tester in Motherload?" Yeah, Tettles, how do you do that skip in the Motherload at the end?
You fall in the water and then you say, "I hate this game," and then you release and then you hit bombs.
My question is, how did it happen 3 times? Like. How is it that you've died to that skip on 2 different runs and you just go into the Motherload again and you have hope again that you're going to be able to get past that weapons tester?
It's similarly to the bird. It's like a mental block for me. I don't really know why I fail it every single time.
Do you think it's sort of like a the yips type situation now where you just you could do it but you're just kind of getting in your own head anytime you get to that point in the Motherload? Like Azrock goes down and just you all of a sudden you get all sweaty and the pressure rises.
Okay,
spaghetti.
Yeah,
that and the bird are probably both just like stupid stuff where I'm just like overthinking what's going on and I just kill myself again on accident just because I'm in that mindset of like, man.
It's a challenge. It's a challenging skip to execute for sure. Okay. Do any of you guys picked up any other questions you wanted to mention? Anything we missed here during the show?
Any sleeper classes / specs for season 3 that'll be good. We're already in season 3. Yeah, I think you mean season 4.
8.3 season 4. Sleeper specs. I'm gonna go with Holy Paladin again. I'm really excited about doing some nonsense with the essence stealing thing on Holy Paladins. Just being able to like bubble taunt if your tank is taking the AoE taunt. And then being able to like, I'm going to mention this every single episode until the patch comes out. But you can just steal bubble taunt, and then you can beam in your wings, or you can take blood of the enemy in your wings. Like those both, that seems like a really big thing to be doing, as a Holy Paladin. And like the increased cooldown of beam or blood will line up with your wings cooldown, I think. Which
does blood of the enemy make it so you crit harder, or
it's increased crit chance and increased crit damage at rank 3.
Oh, okay.
So
got it.
That's pretty big.
Probably going to be really big. Yeah.
If they have wings up, Holy Avenger up, and they're shocking, they're already guaranteed to crit off Holy Shock onto that one. But their consecration damage and any of their other auto attack damage and stuff like that will be really, and their glimmer damage.
And just 25% increased crit damage for the first 5 seconds of that blood window is going to be. I think we'll see some big numbers coming out of Holy Paladins. So that's my sleeper spec.
Oh, yeah. I think mine is Vengeance DH. I think it has potential to be a very, very good tank.
Yeah, I like that.
It's already the safest tank in many situations, and if it had just a little bit more damage with the Gluttony build, maybe if it was a little better in some other situations where mitigation uptime is important, I think it would be the best tank, to be honest.
I really want Vengeance DH to be the best tank. Gimme.
Mm-hmm.
I think Paladin is going to be a little bit significantly better than this season too.
Yeah, I think Mistweaver really made a good outing in MDI, but they never really hit critical mass in like M plus at all. And I think that's something that's with Brewmaster maybe taking more hits, more nerfs. I don't think that I mean, you probably already talked ad nauseum about the Brewmaster nerfs and everything like that. But if they start changing up the tank meta again, I could definitely see a lot more Mistweavers coming into action.
All right, I have a question from VTech asking what our thoughts are for like a heroic only guild next expansion. Does the lack of Titan forging kind of screw that guild over with the lower gear? I think that if you're not a guild progressing Mythic, it's going to be just fine. Like you do not need gear higher than heroic gear to clear heroic. So I think you're gonna be just fine. Like the only reason you need Mythic gear is for content that's a lot harder than AOTC stuff. So I imagine that those guilds are going to be okay.
I think one of the big things is sort of like a shock value that's going to happen right now is that usually you'll see groups that are forming up and desiring people that are around like 440-ish eye level.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to be able to get thanks to Titan forging. So now everybody's item level is going to be lower, and you're going to have to look at like how much corruption gear that people are having, how much corruption gear people are using, because you'll still have the benefits of a pseudo Titan forge. Instead of saying, oh, our eye levels went up 5 or 6 levels because of Titan forging, you're saying, well, our damage is going up because while we have similar item level, we're using very strong corruption effects.
It's kind of like Benthic again, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just going to have like an item level like squish, and people are going to kind of go into different tiers. They'll go into different Dratnos tier lists of how hard they.
One thing we also know for sure is that this is going to be a one patch only system. They're not going to bring corruption exactly into next expansion. We don't know what the loot system is going to look like next expansion, but they said corruption is just for this patch. Yeah. Now, if corruption is extremely popular, they could easily like port it into the next expansion. You know, Titan Forging started off as Thunder Forging. In Throne of Thunder, and that was popular and got some good traction. And I expect that might happen again if corruption is well received. But if it's not, then I imagine we'll see something different next expansion entirely. Or they could just go back to Titan Forging as well. That wouldn't be that hard for them to do.
I'm down for, rabid experimentation in the end of the expansion. If it's good, if it's bad, whatever it is, hopefully it makes the next 2 years of next expansion.
Yeah, I like them taking chances like this. And the system is really cool. It's cool to have this like risk reward and itemization that you actually have to think about again, because that's not something that WoW has had really ever. The only times you've ever had to think about gear was before there was information available. And now that's not true. Like, I don't know. This is just it's a brave new world. I'm looking forward to it.
Something that I actually wanted to talk about is what Titan Forging means for like player retention for lower level players. Because there's a reason that they've kept Titan Forging. I assumed it was because like in Warlords and like Mists of Pandaria and off months, like months that patches weren't occurring, that people would just like stop playing the game once they felt like they had enough player progression. And I assume that with Mythic Plus and Titan Forging, it gives people more of an incentive to play, or at least the numbers reflect people are playing longer because of it.
Like I think that the question we got from VTech about their AOTC only guild, it's easy to imagine an AOTC only guild would just stop clearing once they got everybody their heroic pieces if there wasn't Titan Forging, right? But because there's Titan Forging, you still clear every week because you might get upgrades. Now, that'll still be true with corrupted items. Corrupted items are effectively Titan Forges, but they don't show up on the item level count. They won't show up when you're applying to groups in the group finder. So that's going to, I don't know, it'll be an interesting effect. I think you're right, though, that Titan Forging probably had big positive effects for player retention. There's got to be a reason they kept it despite all the high-end players complaining about it.
I think it's really bad for higher end players like us who actually play the game a significant amount, but for like heroic players, I think it's a really big deal.
Yeah, I expect that I would not be surprised to see Titan Forging return, which would be good because then we wouldn't have to rename our podcast. But yeah,
I was gonna say, I was like, I wonder if it just goes away, what happens to the podcast name?
That's when we'll be the Corrupted Podcast
we
instead.
Do not go away.
Mm-hmm.
We go away with it.
Shit, wait a second.
Yeah. All right, that is going to be all for us this week. Thanks so much, Jack, for joining us. It's been awesome to have you on the show. And anybody who wants to find you can find you on Twitch, right? At AutomaticJak.
everywhere.
Twitter, yeah. Same name, all the places. The one that's just below his name there. Would absolutely recommend their fantastic healer stream for both Mistweaver and Priest perspective primarily. And of course, on the MDI stream as the caster there. And then for Tettles and Trell, that's going to be all for us this week. See you next week. Oh, not next week.
Yeah,
next week we're not going to... Wait, we're not going to have a show
2
next
weeks.
week. Yeah, 2 weeks. We're back in 2. All right, bye.
See you guys.